I'm Mike Moses, your family personal chef, and welcome to my kitchen. Today, we are going to learn how to do something that we've been told in every cookbook, on every recipe online, everywhere you look: season to taste. How do we do that? I've got the tricks coming up. Salt comes in all kinds of forms. You can get Himalayan salt, kosher salt, you can get household salt, and if you want, you can even get a salt lamp. What's the deal with season to taste? Well, to put it in a real simple term, season to taste is the level just below it being too salty. Great, everybody tastes differently. How do we find out what the perfect combination of salt is in our meals? When you season to taste, you are elevating the flavor of the food by adding a little bit of salt. You can oversalt, you can undersalt, or as you've heard many times on many TV shows, overseason, underseason. Well, today I'm going to show you a trick on how to train your palate to season to taste. Here's what we need. Whole bunch of spoons, some no salt added diced tomatoes. We're going to stew those and we're going to put those in a pot, and then we're going to start to season to taste. I'm going to divide this in two. So the first part we're going to over season. The second time we do it, we're going to season to taste. Let's take our tomatoes, and from the can I've got about 800 milliliters. I'm going to divide that in half, 400 milliliters. See, the metric system isn't that hard, is it? Now we open our can of tomatoes, and instead of making a mess, I'll just take a little bit at a time. There's 400 milliliters of tomatoes. First thing we're going to do, turn on the stove, add our 400 milliliters of tomatoes. What we're going to do with the tomatoes are render them down. Then we can season to taste. We're going to use kosher salt for this because table salt really is too small, too tiny. You can't judge. And of course, our handy dandy measuring, 1/4 teaspoon. Tomatoes are broken down. We're actually going to reduce the heat now to medium-low because we don't want to burn our lips out. We wouldn't be able to taste anything. Give your tomatoes a good stir. Have some paper towel on hand. Grab a tasting spoon and give it a taste. Pretty bland. Time to start adding salt. In 1/4 teaspoon increments, go to our salt cozy. I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Give it a stir. Wait about 30-35 seconds in there somewhere. You want to make sure that it's all dissolved. And I'm going to mark down I've used one. I was going to use the same spoon. The right way to do it is to use a new spoon every time you taste. However, since it's only me, and only the tomatoes, I'm going to use the same spoon. I hope you don't mind. Okay, another taste. Still bland. Start to detect a little sharpness. Let's add another 1/4 of salt. The goal here is to over season, so we want to make sure that this is salty, that we can taste the salt. You might taste salt at a different level than me. However, this will train your taste buds to season properly. 30 seconds are up. Let's give it another taste. Starting to come alive. You can start to taste the freshness. Now remember, we're only using just about 1.5 cups of actual tomatoes, so it doesn't take a lot of salt for the tasting. Gonna add another 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So that's 3/4 teaspoon of salt I've added. Stir it around. You may wonder why sometimes you're doing cooking, you're following a recipe, and you feel that it's too salty when you're done. It could be because you use table salt instead of kosher salt. A lot of chefs use kosher salt, and that's what the recipes call for, but sometimes they don't mark it down. Another test. Now the tomatoes taste bright and vibrant. Let's over season it now. One more 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So for this mixture, which is a cup and a half of tomatoes, we've got 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon kosher salt. Whenever you're cooking, you should always taste to season. Always taste the seasoning. Check the seasoning. If there's no salt, if there's no seasoning, no brightness, it's not very good. There, I just passed the threshold. I can actually taste salt now. Very pronounced. It doesn't take much. So 1 teaspoon of salt is too much. 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt is just enough. There we go. We actually have an over-seasoned tomatoes. Now let's perfectly season them. I've reset, cleaned things up. Time to put the remaining tomatoes in the pot. We'll stew those down and then we'll season these perfectly. Judging by the number of 1/4 teaspoons I use, it should take 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt to season these tomatoes perfectly. Here's 1/2 teaspoon, 1/4 of a teaspoon. We'll have to give this about a minute to dissolve. I can actually feel the grains of kosher salt in the bottom. And there, it should be perfectly seasoned. Rule number 1. Now let's make it rule number 2. Rule number 1 is always season. Rule number 2 is always check your seasoning. Even if you know it's perfect, you should always check it. So, 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt into our 400 milliliters of tomatoes. Should be seasoned perfectly. And it is really nice and bright. Now if I added just 5 or 6 more grains of salt, it would be over seasoned. And there you go. That is how you season to taste. Try it 2 or 3 times. In fact, here's an idea. Next time you're at the grocery store and you see a big pallet of unseasoned diced tomatoes on sale for 50 cents, 75 cents, pick up 5 or 6 cans and practice your season to taste. That way, whenever you're cooking under pressure, with the family, friends, kids around, you'll know exactly what you're doing when it comes to seasoning to taste. If you like this video, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more of these, please subscribe. In fact, if there's something you would like to see in particular, please leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching. I look forward to helping you eat healthier, shop smarter, and cook better.